thanksgiving, with an open and humble heart, you will hear our prayer. Lord, fill us with peace and joy to live free from anxiety all the days of our life. Amen.
We ask everyone present to remain standing and join us for the flag salute. Please join Assemblymember Feuer as he leads us in the pledge. Mr. Feuer. You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Friday, March 25, 2011. Assembly met at 9 a.m. Honorable Pheno Meyer, Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, presiding. Chief Clerk E. Dustin Wilson at the desk. Reading Clerk Timothy Moore than reading. The roll was called. Shajian Alejo, Allen, Amiano, Atkins, Bell, Berryhill, Block, Blumenfield.
Mr. Calderon moves and Ms. Conway seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions, there are none. Introduction and references of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Motions and resolutions, the absences for the day will be deemed read and printed in the journal. Mr. Calderon, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 45.5 to allow Assembly members Lowenthal to have guests and photographers on the floor.
Without objection.
Request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 118 to allow Assembly Member Miller to have a guest at his desk and a photographer on the floor.
Without objection.
Also request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 45.5 to allow Assembly Members Feuer, Huber, Huffman, Smythe to speak and adjourn in memory.
Without objection.
Pursuant to Rule 96, request unanimous consent to refer the following bills to committee. AB 1187 by Mr. Fong from the Water, Parks and Wildlife and Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee to the Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee. Makes no sense. Okay. Okay, I see what's going on. AB 1221 by Mr. Alejo from the Water, Parks and Wildlife and Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee to the Environmental Safety and Toxic Material Committee. This is so... Without objection?
Without objection.
And also AB 1296 by Ms. Bonilla from the Health and Human Services Committee to the Human Services and Health Committee.
Without objection. Okay, members, we will now recess the regular session for the purpose of convening the first extraordinary session. We are now in the first extraordinary session. Without objection, we will substitute the prayer pledge and other opening procedures in the regular session for those items in the first extraordinary session. File item 2. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 2 by Senator Simitian, an act relating to energy and making appropriation therefore.
Mr. Chesbrough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. SB 2 enacts into California law a 33% renewable energy procurement mandate by the year 2020 that applies to private and public utilities and all other electricity retail sellers. At the same time, the bill provides flexibility to utilities, protects ratepayers from excessive rates, creates California-based jobs, and helps the California economy. To protect ratepayers from high energy bills due to the cost of renewable energy, the bill requires the PUC to impose cost caps on each utility. These cost caps must be set to protect against disproportionate rate impacts on various ratepayer classes. Recognizing that you can't expect utilities to provide renewable energy if it isn't available, the bill establishes a series of off-ramps from the program that utilities may use when circumstances outside their control delay compliance. These off-ramps include insufficient transmission, permitting and siting delays, and inadequate supply. Many of you may remember the debate over the in-state versus out-of-state energy debate from a few years ago. This bill scraps that and replaces it with a renewable energy product loading order which has been carefully negotiated amongst the utilities, the independent energy producers, consumer groups, labor, and renewables developers. This bill does not prohibit the importation of out-of-state energy. It does emphasize in-state renewable energy development, but also provides flexibility for retail sellers to use out-of-state energy for up to 50% of their compliance obligation over the entire 33% compliance period. Additionally, the bill grandfathers all renewable resources already contracted for by or built by a utility as of June 1, 2010. The bill enjoys broad support. Renewables developers, investor-owned utilities, publicly owned utilities, environmental groups, labor, and consumer advocates. There remains opposition, and no matter what you do with a bill like this, there's going to be some opposition, but we continue to address some of the concerns where there is room to do so. Let's not forget that while the legislature has been debating what a California RPS should look like, the Air Resources Board has moved forward on its own based on greenhouse gas reduction, and which has none of the cost containment provisions that this bill has. So even if you're opposed to the RPS bill, you should be supporting this bill, a bill that provides utilities with the flexibility to meet the higher standard, places into statute strict ratepayer protections, and sends a clear signal to the market that California is serious about renewable energy. With that, I would urge your aye vote.
Mr. Portantino.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers and members. I rise in support of Mr. Simitian's RPS bill. As some of you know, last year I laid off this bill largely because the municipals, in particular the muni in my district, had some concerns. It's been mentioned that many of those concerns have been addressed. Some are still to come. I look forward, and I know Mr. Simitian has talked to the municipals, and it's my understanding that in the subsequent legislation many of those concerns will be addressed. I look forward to seeing that cleanup legislation as it progresses, but given the understanding that they will be addressed, I'm prepared to support this today, and I would urge an aye vote.
Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise in opposition to this bill, and I think that we need to take a long look at what we're really doing to California with driving up the cost of electricity. That's what this renewable portfolio 33% target will do, especially given the fact that we don't have lean, green, cheap energy on the agenda. We ought to be, in spite of what's going on in Japan, we ought to take a look at the new nuclear energy. I think that that's something that if that were part of this package, I would take a serious look at it. But until we get the costs under control with a true market-based ability to control costs, then I think that all we're going to do is make electricity more expensive, make us less competitive with other states. And if you're a manufacturing company looking to bring jobs to California, you're going to be taking a hard look at other places because of this bill. I urge a no vote. Thank you.
Mr. Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to commend the author, Senator Simitian, for his hard work in bringing SB 2 to this floor today. We all know it's been a labor of a lot of negotiations, a lot of hard work, not only during this legislative cycle, but last year and 4 years for that matter. He has labored hard to bring the diverse coalitions together for a bill to vote on today. But I would not be true to the committee that I chair. I would not be true to the people that I represent in the state of California if I did not raise some of the concerns that were raised during the committee and throughout the community as we move forward. One being cost. We have to be very clear that the cost containments and the off-ramps that Mr. Chesborough has expressed are truly there. Right now, at a time when energy rates nationwide are $2,000 per household with a prediction of a 10% increase this summer, we have to make sure that those cost containments are real. As it relates to the municipalities, similar to what Mr. Portantino raised, there are many municipalities that we all represent throughout the state of California who have voiced their concerns on being punished for being aggressive in purchasing more than their share, moving toward this 33%, and they will not get credit for that. We also have to look after the IOUs, those two who right now under contracting are being punished for contracts that are less than 10 years. So those are issues that we have to look at as well. But the real issue I have is the issue of jobs. We have heard time and time about all the jobs that are going to be promised through this passage of this bill. And I commend the author for taking my amendment last year that deals with workforce readiness. So I say we have accepted the fact that 33% is the law of the land. Many say, why do we need it in statute? We've debated it, and we're moving toward that. But I think we do need to put it in statute, but not for the reasons that I've been told, not for the reasons to send a message to Wall Street. I'm doing this to send a message to Main Street. Main Street, where 12% or higher of unemployed Californians now reside, and in making sure that those jobs that are promised are delivered. That this green wave that we have promised to Californians represent the brown, the black, the Asian communities, women, disabled veterans, making sure everyone, young and old, have a chance at jobs that are promised through this green wave. I stand here making sure that we represent households. The 51% of Californians who are struggling to stay in their household, meaning they're struggling to pay their light bill, they're struggling to pay their water bill, they're struggling to pay their gas bill, making sure that those cost containments are real. Members, this is a great opportunity for California, but we must make sure we do this right. They said it's about sending a signal to Wall Street. Yes, there is a signal that we do need to send to Wall Street, that we are watching you. And the shenanigans that you pulled 10 years ago in manipulating the energy crisis in California will not happen again. Let's be very clear, members. The energy crisis that happened in 2000, 2001 was not caused by one ratepayer being late on paying his bill. It wasn't caused by a lack of diversity or lack of supply of electricity here in the state of California. It wasn't caused by not one investor-owned utility or public-owned utility failing to do their job. It was caused by Wall Street manipulation. Let's be very clear. Enron never produced one electron. They never transported not 1 megawatt over any transmission line. They never delivered 1 kilowatt to anyone's home or business. But they clearly determined what we paid for it and when it was available. They clearly manipulated the market. So I'm asking members today that we make sure our eyes are wide open on this issue and we're vigilant and we stay forthright and challenging not only the author to stay true to his commitments, but we as members as well to represent the people that we represent. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a CEO last year who represents a utility company, and we were comparing the telephony market to the electrical market. And we stated, if Alexander Graham Bell came back today, he would not recognize the telephone, let alone know how to use it. But if Thomas Edison came back today, he would still recognize the generation, the transmission, and the distribution system that he built well over 100 years. I say that to say, members, the evolution of the telephony industry was not driven by any piece of legislation in this body or anywhere else across the nation. It was done by innovation. It was done by accessibility, reliability, and most importantly, affordability. Those are the same tenets that need to drive this RPS debate as we move forward. So I ask you guys to be mindful of that. And as I close and I support this bill with the understanding that Senator Simitian and this body and the Senate will continue to stay mindful and committed to these issues that we've stated, and we'll address those as it goes forward. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Calderon.
Go ahead, call everybody else.
Mr. Furutani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. I stand to thank Senator Simitian for his perseverance and his stick-to-itiveness to keep bringing this bill back to us, and every time he's done that, it's gotten better and better. I also stand to thank our chairs of our Utilities Commission. When I first sat on the commission with Felipe Fuentes as chair and now with Steve Bradford, Mr. Bradford has just shared the passion in which he has pursued the correction and the changing of this bill so it is much better than what it started as. I stand in support of this bill because the issue of alternative energy is a challenge that we have not only in California, but we have in the world. And in that challenge, we have to have an opportunity to develop and invent and also spread about the country these different ways of generating new energy. And the issue of nuclear power has been raised, but we see the problems of that already with what's happening in Japan. So in terms of looking at this bill, we have fought on the Utilities Commission to make sure that the ratepayers would be protected against unusually high costs, and the CPUC has been charged with that responsibility. We have also fought to make sure that it was realistic relative to the energy producing companies, that they have different options in which they can invoke during difficult times, or off-ramps as we're calling them, where situations beyond their control to involve themselves in the process and they can't reach these goals. There are ways in which they can mitigate those situations. So this bill has been evolving. This bill has changed. This bill is generating the kind of green wave that Mr. Bradford has talked about. We are now making an absolute commitment to alternative energy, and as a result of that, we will see the industry that's going to be built around that grow and grow. And I reinforce and I echo what the chairman said relative to making sure that all of our communities partake in this new energy, this new green industry, and that's to make sure that all Californians be a part of this. And when we look at the new industries that we need to develop in the state of California, this is one of them. This is a technology where we're going to export it to other parts of the world. This is a new industry where we're going to take the lead once again, like we have in so many other areas in California's past. Thank you very much. I support this bill.
Mr. Smythe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of this measure. I oppose the RPS standard of years past and continue to do so. However, that is the law of the land, as our floor manager, for our colleague from Humboldt County, has alluded to. And so one of the points that was raised, and I think is important, that if we do not take this measure and this bill and move it forward, the implementation of the 33% will still be done. However, it will be done by unelected boards and commissions that we talk about over and over having an impact, a negative impact on our businesses, on our local jurisdictions, for rules that are made and proposals that are put forth without without proper vetting. And this bill has been heard multiple times over multiple years, and we've had the ability to put input, and the public and those that are impacted have all had their chance and their say. May not have everything that we want, but rarely is that the case. So I would rather support a bill and vote for a bill here today that has gone through the legislative process than to simply vote no and let the implementation be done by those that have no accountability to those who are impacted, unlike those of us here in the legislature. So I do ask for an aye vote as well.
Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of what I think may well be one of the more important pieces of public policy many of us in this room will ever have the chance to support. As we sit here today with nuclear reactors in Japan still leaking radiation, with the seemingly endless cycle of conflict in the Middle East, the need to move California down this path, I think, has never been more obvious, and we all owe a lot of thanks to Senator Simitian for giving us a chance to take a major leap in that direction here today. Now, it's important to know that this bill does provide flexibility for utilities. It does provide cost protection for ratepayers. But as we think about the cost protection embedded in this bill, it's also important to think about the cost of not doing what's in this bill. Again, we need only look at Japan and the Middle East today to see that there is a tremendous cost of not moving California down this path. There are just so many reasons to support this bill. They may be, for some of us, clean air and healthier communities. For many of us, the issue of climate change and the need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Certainly a better energy policy, a smarter one that dovetails with our foreign policy needs to be more energy independent. And of course, something all of us talk about a lot, but rarely have a chance to do something big about, and that is the issue of jobs. Now, it's important to know that these jobs will not only be in California, they're going to be in every part of California. Certainly, there are going to be many opportunities for distributed generation of renewable energy in urban centers like San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. There are incredible possibilities for solar and geothermal in the Imperial Valley. The Tehachapi wind resources are phenomenal. The high desert sun is going to be a part of this. And of course, biomass and agricultural waste in the Central Valley, among many, many other things. My friends, this is the right bill at the right time for California's economy and for California's environment, and I request an aye vote.
Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And although I look at these goals for California, and I really appreciate that we're always forward thinking, you also have to look at the timing. I did not vote for the RPS a couple years ago because I thought it was the wrong direction for the state at this time with the jobs that we're exporting out all the time. We talk about the construction jobs of green energy. It's true, construction jobs will be generated on a very temporary basis. But with the protections against most of the ratepayers in California, the costs associated with building these new plants and the future energy production from these plants will be passed on to the higher energy ratepayers, which are businesses, government entities, those type of things. And I just want to go over some of the costs. The four largest providers here in California since 2008, when we first put the 20% RPS in. This is from CPUC's own estimates back in March 2010. For Southern California Edison, it would be a 34% increase to 2020. PG&E, a 44% increase over since 2008. LAWP, 74% increase since 2008. SD&G&E, 41% since 2008. Those are 4 out of the 60 providers, the largest ones, but many of them are going to be much higher than that. And I ask our members, is this the time to be putting this extra expense over such a short period of time on the rest of the businesses still left in California to produce our jobs? For how many jobs will we lose for every one we gain on a temporary basis for those construction jobs? I appreciate the goal of this. I think there's better ways to implement it over a longer period of time and give our businesses a chance to get their feet again. I urge a no vote.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I also rise in strong support of this bill. This has been a long time coming. We've been pushing this idea of 33% for several years. We had a bill that was passed in this body that was unfortunately terminated by Schwarzenegger. Then last year we had it stall here. Finally, we have a chance to do legislatively what we all know is a good thing for the environment, a good thing for California, and at the end of the day is also a good thing for ratepayers. And I wanted to mention that because it's a lot of people have been talking about what is the impact on ratepayers. This bill has provisions in it to prevent that sticker shock scenario that people are worried about, which people fear is going to happen with renewable energy. Under this bill, the Public Utilities Commission can impose price caps for each utility so the ratepayers are protected from higher energy bills due to the cost of renewables. I also have a letter here from the Division of Ratepayer Advocates, California Public Utilities Commission, and they talk about in their letter how they strongly support the ratepayer protection provisions of this bill. So we don't get those protections if it's just done, Lone Ranger style by the executive branch. We do get those protections when it's done through the appropriate channels as we have it now through this bill, and I urge your strong support.
Mr. V. Manny Perez.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. I rise also in support of this measure, and I also want to commend Senator Simitian for his hard work. I also rise in support of this measure for the reason of jobs that was mentioned before. Coming from a district that has one of the highest unemployment rates in the state of California, this is very important to the Edith-Yosemite district. Often described as the crown jewel of renewable resource regions, the Edith-Yosemite district is notable for one of the best known renewable resources in the world. According to the numerous studies, Imperial County, for example, and the eastern Coachella Valley has tremendous renewable energy development potential. We're talking about 31,900 megawatts of concentrated solar power. We're talking about 3,400 megawatts of geothermal. We're also talking about 1,830 megawatts of wind energy. Assuming the full build-out of these renewable resources, the potential for job creation in the Edith-Yosemite district alone is estimated to be over 200,000 jobs. But even with my affinity for renewable energy and support for policies to reduce global warming and climate change, our current economic crisis requires that our transition to renewable resources of energy be affordable for consumers as well as households, that it not disrupt major industrial and manufacturing bases that provide good quality jobs, and that the costs are manageable for small businesses. To create jobs and promote a sustainable recovery, we need to create an economic climate in California that makes businesses want to invest and innovate again. But one other element that I'd like to discuss as well very briefly, members, is the element of equity and equal opportunity, which was an element that was brought to us by Member Bradford. The truth of the matter is that the green collar economy would be an element, would be an industry that's going to provide equity and opportunities for many folks that have been down and out, especially folks of color. And quite frankly, it's folks of color and underserved communities that need this opportunity in underserved areas and as well in rural California. This would be their opportunity. A person, for example, that's coming back from war, a veteran, or a single mother, or perhaps an individual that has been in prison and is now reformed, is looking for an opportunity. This is their opportunity. This is about equity. This is about justice. I ask for I vote today.
Mr. Logue.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this bill. Just when I thought we've had enough, when we finally figured it out, I'm never amazed at how further we can drive this bus off a cliff, and this is going to do it. It's going to cost the ratepayers of California, are you prepared for this? $7 billion a year increase. It's going to be passed on to the ratepayers, but guess what? When I have to go out to the people of California who create all these jobs and tell them their energy costs are going to go up along with their taxes, they're going to pack their bags and continue to leave this state because the people in this building don't understand that the businesses cannot compete on a global scale because we're holding them hostage, and they're not going to take it anymore. This is the type of legislation that does damage to the health and economic well-being of California. I had teachers in my office last week, and they says, why is it that we have to lay off 20,000 teachers next year because of our budget? And I looked at them and I said, it's real simple. Because we keep passing legislation that destroys businesses and drives jobs out of California, there's no revenue. You have to be able to connect the dots. Last year at this time compared to this year, we have 4 times more businesses leaving California than we do last year. Permission, Mr. Speaker, to show an example?
Without objection.
This is what we've done. This is what you've done to the state of California. 800 pages to get a permit, to file 800 pages to get a permit.
Mr. Calderon, you are recognized.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, point of order. Point of order. The request was to use materials on the floor. It wasn't to throw them all over the floor of the assembly.
The point is well taken. Mr. Logue, you will please refrain from throwing papers.
But I apologize. I'm frustrated because I've got 800 pages here of what it requires in order to get a permit.
I've ruled on the point. Mr. Hall, do you have something else?
Yes, I just apparently there's still some discussion about the behavior on the floor, and I'll ask again for you to call point of order to the Speaker.
Yeah, I've already ruled on the point. The point is well taken. Thank you. All right, Mr. Logue, thanks for your apology. You may continue.
This is 800 pages in order to get a renewable harvest for harvesting trees in the state. We cannot continue to over-regulate the businesses of California. I apologize for my outburst, but look, I'm looking at people in the faces while they're packing their families' goods and they're leaving the state for other states. I have to talk to the teachers who were laying off to say there's a reason why you're being laid off. To explain to them, last year 120,000 jobs were destroyed in this state, and Texas created 130,000 jobs. I just want to know, how much is enough? 30% renewable. We're the only state in the country doing this. How can we afford it? I apologize for what my actions today, but I don't apologize for the fact that this body has created a climate of business hostility that is second to none for the rest of California. Thank you.
Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually came to the floor today undecided on this, and actually was leaning in favor of supporting the bill until I heard some testimony from a supporter of the bill about all the potential long-term consequences that need to be monitored if it got out of control. I was actually leaning in support because I had heard that it may rein in the California Air Resources Board in potential abuse by their organization in implementing what is current law. And so I guess what I would like to hear from the floor jockey today, the floor manager of this, how do you increase, and this would be in your close, how do you increase the cost of production of energy but not pass it along? Where is it absorbed? So if there's a $6 billion or $7 billion annual increase in the cost of energy, how is that not passed along by the PUC? Who eats that cost, and how do they survive? The issue that was spoke of as to energy sources that are out in the Imperial Valley and in other parts in eastern Riverside County, great sources of renewable energy, opposed bitterly by members of the environmental community trying to shut down those projects from occurring every step of the way. How do you then import that energy in order to achieve the noble goals that are stated in this particular bill? And then to the issue of creating jobs, which I am first in line to support that as a byproduct of a good policy, not as just reasons to raise everybody's rates. If we're going to create jobs, we have to figure out how to keep the businesses in California. We've seen a number of jobs in the energy industries that will retail in California, but they will not manufacture in California. That hurts all of us in our goal. So I would hope that these can be addressed in the closing remarks of the author. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chesbro, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Looks like we have one more.
Sorry, we have comments from Mr. Calderon.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I put my mic down because I was so disturbed by the papers on the floor. Right, Mr. Speaker, members, I rise in support of this bill for very specific reasons. If we do not act, then the California Air Resources Board will act in terms of meeting its greenhouse gas requirements. This it will do pursuant to Schwarzenegger, our Republican governor's directive to do that. And this bill before you, first of all, places that decision where it should be in this House, but also is a far better approach than what the board is considering, starting with the fact that this bill gives authority to protect ratepayers. Now, versions that passed last year did not really protect ratepayers. And one question I would always ask is, who's representing the ratepayer here? Well, this bill represents the ratepayer, and that's why Division of Ratepayer Advocates supports the bill. But it's more significant because this bill allows the PUC to allow retailers to delay compliance with the targets if it demonstrates there is inadequate transmission capacity, unforeseen permitting or interconnection delays, insufficient supply of electricity from eligible resources available to the retailer, or unanticipated curtailment of renewable energy. In other words, there are off-ramps in this bill. It is an ambitious effort, although the 20% goal is nearly achieved by all, but it's an ambitious bill. And a lot of things have to happen before these goals in this bill can be met, but the bill recognizes the fact that it may not be able to accomplish that, and so it gives off-ramps. It allows sellers to bank. So if they saved or purchased renewable energy in 1 year, they get credit for it in subsequent years. So I mean, this bill is as good as it gets in terms of legislation that attempts to balance the interests, including the interests of the ratepayer. So I ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Chesbro.
Thank you very much, members, for a spirited discussion on the floor. I want to join many of my colleagues in congratulating Senator Simitian in his tenacity and his persistence. Seem to recall that this is the third time around, and hopefully the third time's a charm, where we either got it off this floor or we got within minutes of getting it off this floor. And this time, I think we're going to do it. So I thank him for that. I also thank him for the fact that it has gotten better as we've gone along. And this bill really finds that sweet spot between the importance of creating a degree of certainty that can attract investors who will help us build a renewable future and help us build a green economy in California on the one hand, and on the other hand, does not lock us in an inflexible way that creates the risk of either unattainable goals or goals that would be too expensive. So it's found that balance, and I hope that folks can see that. The major objection I've heard brought up on the floor today is the question of potential impact on rates, and I would like to address that, Mr. Speaker. Electricity prices in California are historically volatile, and diversification is the best way to avoid drastic price increases. The arguments against this bill on the basis of cost to ratepayers seems to assume that the cost of natural gas will stay the same or go down, and that the cost of renewables will somehow stay where they are or go up. And the opposite is demonstrably true. The price of natural gas is continuing to go up, and the price of electricity from renewables is continuing to go down. In California, natural gas power generation dominates, but only 13% of the gas is generated here in the state, and that number is falling. The financial markets and the U.S. Energy Information Agency estimate that natural gas prices will double over the next decade to higher demand. Consequently, California utilities are openly exposed to market price volatility, and it is wrong to assume that energy prices will be static without the 30% standard. This bill provides protections for the ratepayers at the PUC. It provides off-ramps for electricity generators and providers if there are unforeseeable obstacles that come up that make it impossible to achieve it. I think it's got the right balance of a solid commitment with the flexibility necessary to make it work. I urge your aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 55, noes 19. The measure passes. The first extraordinary session is recessed upon call of the Speaker. We are back in regular session. And please direct your attention to the rear of the chamber where Ms. Lowenthal has a member's resolution to present to some guests. Ms. Lowenthal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Members, thank you for taking this moment to acknowledge David Warren, who has been such a tireless voice for justice for so long. I think you all know David as an inmate advocate. You may not know that he served as an intern for Speaker Jesse Unruh. There is a wonderful resolution here that lays out his many accomplishments and contributions, and it's far too much to read. But the highlights include acknowledgement of his 5 decades of public service, his 15 years as a volunteer prison chaplain, his tireless work, his unwavering commitment, and just as important as all the words so beautifully written here are the words you can find between the lines. Namely, that David Warren is what is most affectionately described as a mensch, and his mother, Manya, who's here with him, has every right to be proud. I thank you and ask my colleague, Mr. Berryhill, to say a few words.
Mr. Berryhill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, it is truly an honor to be able to be here and present this resolution to David. He is he's a great friend. He's been a great mentor for me. You know, he's retired more than Brett Favre, but thank goodness that he did come back. He spent 15 years with the Department of Correction and Rehabilitation. and has just been really a wonderful friend and someone that when I put my foot in my mouth could come into my office, explain how to fix it, and get me out of trouble. So I will miss Dave as a friend and a mentor, and we wish you the best in retirement, Dave, and if you ever decide to come back, you will be welcomed with open arms. Thank you.
Mr. Nielsen.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, I would rise too to acknowledge David. Over the many years, we've probably disagreed on far more about criminal justice than we've agreed on. But it's always been pleasant, and never could there be a question of his sincerity and his wisdom and his dedication to other human beings, particularly those who have come across with issues of the law. He is a greatly sensitive man, a very respectful man. He has dedicated so very much of his energies, and I truly do know how very hard he's worked day and night for what he believes in. He is most deserving of this recognition for his lifetime commitment to humankind.
Mr. Calderon.
I also like to return to motions and resolutions. Request unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker and members, to waive the rules to allow Manuel Perez to speak in adjourned memory.
Without objection. So, members, we're going to turn to business on the daily file, second reading. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 458 with amendments, 433 with amendments, 934 with amendments, 312 with amendments, 390 with amendments, 380 with amendments, 484 with amendments, and Assembly Bill 654 with amendments.
All bills will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Okay. So Mr. Miller wants to announce his guest under motions and resolutions. Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, I'm proud to announce that I have my daughter with me today, Leah, age 17, class president of her junior class at La Sierra High School in Riverside. Thank you.
Okay, members, we're going to move to the concurrence and Senate amendments file item 9. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 50 by Assemblymember Hill, an act relating to taxation to take effect immediately, tax levy.
Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. AB 50 addresses a tax issue that came up as a result of the San Bruno gas explosion of September 9th of last year. This bill simply allows tax relief associated with the explosion in San Bruno to be treated as a qualified disaster payment for tax purposes. The amendments taken in the Senate add an operative date of September 9th, 2010 of this bill. I ask for your aye vote on concurrence with the Senate amendments.
Seeing no question or debate on this matter, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 75, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. Okay, we're going to move to Assembly third reading. File item 12. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 328 by Assemblymember Smythe, an act relating to inverse condemnation.
Mr. Smythe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, excuse me, AB 328 simply makes two changes to the law surrounding inverse condemnation procedures. First, it makes the theory of comparative fault applicable to inverse condemnation actions. And second, the bill ensures that the California Code of Civil Procedures, Section 998, applies to settlement offers made by government entities in inverse condemnation actions. This bill has received unanimous support in the Judiciary Committee. It's also supported by the League of Cities, California League of Counties, and has received no opposition. I ask for an aye vote.
Seeing no further question or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 75, no 0. The measure passes. Okay, so we're going to move to Assembly Joint Resolution 5. Clerk will read.
Assembly Joint Resolution 5 by Assemblymember Bonnie Lowenthal relative to transportation.
Ms. Lowenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AJR 5 would encourage the President and Congress to enact legislation to study the feasibility of collecting transportation revenue based on vehicle miles traveled, commonly referred to as VMT. Mr. Speaker, our current method of using gasoline excise taxes to fund transportation has worked well as a user pay system for many years, but it's not as effective as it used to be. Cars today have improved fuel efficiency, which we all agree is a good thing, and more cars are using alternative fuels, also a good thing. But the end result is that gas tax revenues are going down at a time when highway use is going up. VMT is an idea that has been studied extensively, but not all the details are worked out. Right now, for instance, it's not clear exactly how to implement a VMT system and, more importantly, how to make it equitable. The study called for in this bill is intended to shed light on these types of issues. The concept of a VMT fee isn't new to Congress. Congress realized the need to replace the gas tax with a better system when they passed the last transportation bill, which we know as Safety Lou, many years ago. As part of Safety Lou, Congress established a commission to make recommendations on how to pay for transportation systems into the future. Interestingly, the Commission recommended implementing a VMT-based system by 2020. AJR 5 simply encourages Congress to take this recommendation and begin figuring out how to implement it. With that, I urge an aye vote.
Mr. Norby.
Mr. Speaker, I laid off this bill in committee and probably will do so again. I agree with the sentiment behind it. As a free market respecter of incentives and believing that people should pay for what they get, the fairest way to pay for our highways would be based on two factors: mileage traveled and when those miles are traveled, meaning if you travel during off hours, you'd pay less. The challenge is how to have a system that monitors that also respects privacy and isn't abused by simply monitoring where people are going and when. I think we all have concerns about that, as does the author, and I know she'll want those addressed. That is my reservation, rather than the principle that mileage traveled should determine payment for roads, rather than a gas tax system, which is out of date, especially with hybrid cars, cars that don't use gasoline at all, and also people that might be using more gasoline and not traveling as much as people that are traveling more and using less. We need a new system to pay for our roads, and this may be heading in that direction, but I still do have those concerns.
Mr. Jeffries.
My colleague pretty much addressed most of the concerns we shared in the Transportation Committee when we heard this bill, this proposal. There is, in fact, a valid concern that the chair of Trans is attempting to address with this. It does need to be addressed. For those of us who have counties where we have long commute times, long drives, in my particular hometown of Lake Elsinore, we've been recognized as having the longest commute time in the nation. And what that means for constituents who we represent in the outlying areas, we will pay the most in the vehicle mileage tax should it be implemented. And so the issue that the chair has brought up with regards to making it equitable so that Californians can afford it if they don't live in the larger inner cities is very important, because it does need to be addressed for those of us who do not have in our counties significant employment opportunities and do have to make large and long commute times. So our recommendation from our caucus is to oppose. As the Vice Chair of Trans, I'm recommending that my colleagues stay off of this and not oppose it, because it is a valid concern, but it does need to be addressed for those of us representing rural counties.
Ms. Lowenthal, you may close.
Thank you very much. I appreciate Mr. Jeffrey's sentiments, which is why that word equitable is so important in my statement. And I would like to ask for the first roll for co-authors, please.
Okay, Ms. Lowenthal has asked that the first roll be open for co-authors. Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. Okay, the measure has 42 co-authors. And because this is an AJR, it also requires a roll call vote. So this vote is on the measure itself. Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 46, noes 16. The resolution is adopted. Okay, this concludes business on the daily file. We're now going to move to announcements and adjourn in memories. Session schedule is as follows. Wednesday, March 30th, check-in session and floor session upon call of the Speaker. Thursday, March 31st, floor session at 9 a.m. Friday, April 1st, floor session upon call of the Speaker, no check-in session. All of the other items remaining will be passed and retained. All motions shall be continued. We're now going to move to requests to adjourn in memory. Mr. Fewer, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask us to adjourn in memory of Warren Christopher. Many of us know his most prominent accomplishments, negotiation of the Dayton Peace Agreement to end the Bosnian War, negotiating to have the hostages in Iran released, his very distinguished service as Secretary of State. But what might not be known to many in this room, particularly if you don't come from Los Angeles, is the crucial civic role Warren Christopher played. In the wake of the civil unrest in the 1990s, Mayor Bradley was looking for a figure of unimpeachable integrity who really could command the force of a room to reform Los Angeles Police Department when the then police chief, Daryl Gates, was widely perceived as resisting that reform. Warren Christopher was selected, and the result was a document that emerged what became known as the Christopher Commission, which was the template for reforming a police department very much in need of being much more responsive to the communities it served. Warren Christopher was also known among many in the legal services community for something else. He was a real champion for having the law be used to protect people who were unable to protect themselves. He modeled that commitment in his service at the law firm where he worked for 4 decades, O'Melveny and Myers, and a real champion for that cause in the wider community. Really an example of what it means to be a true community servant, a public servant on a national scale who found ways to serve in the neighborhoods of his city. And Warren Christopher finally was known as someone who was a great listener. He knew the power of words and therefore chose them carefully and used them rarely. He was known for being in a meeting, waiting until its conclusion, and then being able to concisely summarize all the events in the room and provide a sense of direction for everyone there, no matter how contentious the debate had been. An example for all of us here in the state legislature. Warren Christopher will be long remembered for his extraordinary career, and I ask that we adjourn in his memory.
Ms. Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't often adjourn in memory, but I'd like to adjourn in memory of Ruby Kim Montgomery. She was a longtime resident of Stockton, and for the last 48 years had been a community volunteer in San Joaquin County. She passed away on Friday, March 11th, at the age of 93. Just hours before the San Joaquin County Democratic Party was to give her a special recognition for her many years of service to the community. In 2003, she was honored as Woman of the Year in the 5th Senate District, then represented by Senator Mike Machado. She also was a volunteer for 16 years with the American Cancer Society and was a volunteer with the Stockton chapter of the AARP and the Central Methodist Church Women's Group. Ruby was preceded in death by her husband, Bill Montgomery, who was a longtime senior Senate staffer in the 1960s and 70s, and she's survived by her sons, David and Doug Kim, and Doug's wife, Sandra, who's also a member of Assemblymember Solario's staff. Ruby is also survived by her granddaughter, Deanne Rivera, her husband, Ron, and great-granddaughter, Ava. So please join me in commemorating the long and well-lived life of Ruby Kim Montgomery.
Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, along with many others in Marin County, am reeling today from news that we received yesterday that a good friend and a colleague, Marin County Supervisor Charles McGlashan, died very suddenly on Sunday. He was just 49. Charles was a terrific, brilliant, talented guy. He got an undergraduate degree at Yale University, an MBA at Stanford. And he put this incredible skill set to work over the course of his career for sustainability as an environmental consultant, for a couple of years as my colleague on the Marin Municipal Water District Board, and then for 7 years as a Marin County supervisor, where he'll probably be best known for doing something very historic. He spearheaded the creation of the first successful community choice aggregation authority in California, an entity now known as Marin Clean Energy. And in that work that he did in local government on so many different issues, he really pushed the envelope of local government and of good, sustainable public policy. He and I co-chaired the campaign to pass an historic sales tax measure to create the Sonoma Marin Rail Transit Authority, or the SMART train, which is going to provide an important new transportation alternative for the North Bay. He was a tremendous champion of bicycle transportation and of alternative transportation. He helped create the Marin Economic Forum. He pushed the envelope on an issue that Ms. Brownlee has been championing in this body, trying to eliminate the ubiquitous plastic bag through his leadership in local government. And on so many other issues, he simply embodied not only an incredible set of skills and talents, but a very deep and authentic commitment to our environment. There's one other thing that I will always remember and appreciate about Charles, and that is he did something that we don't see very often. He took risks. He took his passions and his beliefs, and he was willing to take risks to carry them out and see them through as public policy. It's one of these events, colleagues, that hopefully makes us all appreciate and value each other a little bit more. And certainly his legacy is one that will challenge us to do all of our work in the name of the public to the very highest standards. Charles leaves behind his wife, Carol Misseldine, and 2 brothers. He will be deeply missed. And, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the chance to adjourn in memory of a good man who did great work.
Mr. Gordon.
I rise to join my colleague, Mr. Huffman, in remembering the life of Marin County Supervisor Charles McGlashan. I had the honor and privilege of serving with Charles for the last 7 years on the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. There was no better public servant, an individual who took his work serious, who was inquisitive, intelligent, and one who sought to bring compromise to difficult situations. He was taken from us far too long, at an age far too young, and we should honor him for his great public service. Thank you.
Mr. Amiano.
Yes, I do want to join this tribute to Mr. McGlashan.
the shocking way and the immediate way he passed. I know his family's going to be dealing with those issues for a long time, as well as his extended family and professional colleagues. I knew him on the board of the Golden Gate Bridge Transportation board, and he was absolutely a risk taker. I was promoting at that time a suicide deterrent. It was a very controversial issue. He looked at it and joined me in support. And when you had his support, you had support. There was no nodding or silent agreement. He spoke. He was extremely articulate, as has been mentioned, and he had a very, very good sense of humor, a very infectious laugh, and was extremely passionate about many issues, some of which we would probably think of as a grind. But when he was behind something, he threw his whole being into it. So I respectfully ask an adjournment in his memory, and of course our deepest condolences to his family. And we have lost a champion. Thank you.
Mr. Smythe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today to adjourn in memory of another son of California who died in combat to preserve our freedom. Rudy Acosta, United States Army Private First Class, was killed in Afghanistan on March 19th. He worked tirelessly as a combat medic assigned to the 4th Squadron, 2nd Stryker Cavalry Regiment out of Germany. He was eager and proud to serve. He was looking to go into medical school when his deployment ended. He will be awarded the Purple Heart and Bronze Star for his heroism. He died with only 2 months left in his tour, and he was 19 years old. I ask we adjourn in his memory.
Mr. V. Manny Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It is with a sad heart that I rise to adjourn in memory on behalf of Luz M. Maldonado, mother of former Assemblywoman for the 8th Assembly District, Bonnie Garcia. Luz M. Maldonado was born in Fajardo, Puerto Rico, September 25, 1943, and passed away from heart disease this Saturday, March 26, 2011. Known as Lucy to family and friends, Lucy came to the States as a child with her family to reach the American dream. She later raised her children in New York City. Lucy was a graduate of American Business College and spent the majority of her career working for the Small Business Administration and the Housing Authority. She was known for her golden voice and recorded several records in the 1960s. In her later years, she loved mariachi music and regularly broke into song whenever the roving singers approached tableside. More times than the family could count, the audience would demand more songs, and she would abandon dinner to join the band for the night. Lucy has been a resident of Riverside County for the last 20 years and resided in Cathedral City, California. She is survived by her mother, Paola Maldonado, her children, Bonnie Garcia, Emelinda McGinnis, and Joseph Cortez, her grandchildren, Crystal McLashen Cortez, Jacob Santiago, Rolando Santiago, Melissa Garcia Blaylock, Javier Garcia, and her great-grandchildren, Giovanni Nieves, Robert Morales, Ava Blaylock, and Ella Blaylock. Lucy will be laid to rest at Forest Lawn in Cathedral City today. And I believe Mr. Paul Cook would also be adjourning in her memory. Thank you.
Mr. Cook.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I also rise in support. I talked to Bonnie, and she asked me to say a few words. I met her mom several times. In fact, if some of the more senior people, you might remember her. Lucy was on the floor. She sat right there. Bonnie was my benchmate for a number of years. Very, very personable woman, to say the least. And if you knew Bonnie, it might give you some insight into somebody that is extremely gregarious, obviously musical, but somebody that kind of grew up in a very difficult environment. Bonnie herself grew up on the streets of New York, a Puerto Rican environment. I talked to her about that quite a bit. I myself was in Connecticut, which had a large number of Puerto Ricans living in the area, and we all went to Catholic school together, and we used to talk about, they would talk about New York and how rough it was. And she must have been quite a woman to, you know, have a daughter like Bonnie. Bonnie was my student 100 years ago, it seems like, at College of the Desert. And the first time I had Bonnie, she got in an argument with me, sound familiar, about political science and this and this and that. And I said, boy, I tell you, I'd love to meet your mother, which I finally did, because Bonnie, as you know, just like her mom, was driven. But I think she was also indicative of the spirit of, I don't want to say immigrants, because as you all know, Puerto Rico was part of the United States, but somebody that came from another culture to the streets of New York, paid their dues, and made it. She's had a lot of heart problems over the years. I know her daughter was very, very proud of her. She was always an inspiration, not only to her daughter, but I hope to everyone in this chamber. Thank you.
Mr. Calderon, you are recognized.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, members, I request unanimous consent to be permitted to speak in adjourn in memory.
Without objection, Mr. Calderon.
I wanted to adjourn in memory of an amazing and unique Californian, and that is Elizabeth Taylor. I met her once when she was here campaigning in favor of a bill that allows one to own rights to their name after they die. And had a chance to meet her and feel at least that connection, and enough of a connection to rise and speak in memory of her. Of course, she was an iconic actress. She defined a whole generation of actors, and she lived a good life. But I rise to recognize the contribution that she made, not only in the pride she gave all the Californians being here and living here, but for the visibility and the support and the fight against AIDS. It wasn't until Rock Hudson contracted AIDS that we realized that it was everyone's problem, not just the problems of a particular part of our community. And she was there with him, attracting the attention she attracts and providing the support that she provided until her death. She actually, many, perhaps not all of you, but some of you might remember in one of her famous 8 marriages, actually to 6 people, because she married one twice. Richard Burton, he bought her this enormous diamond ring. It was, I don't know, it could have been 25 carats. It was enormous. When she got involved in the fight to AIDS, she took that ring and she auctioned it off to raise money for her foundation to fight AIDS. So I do believe that it is appropriate to recognize her, to recognize the passing in California, the capital of the motion picture industry, Hollywood, the passing of a generation of actors, and I wish her well on her way.
Thank you, members. Please bring those names to the desk to be printed in the journal. We have one more announcement. Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, for most of the last year, my office has been fortunate to have the services of Mr. Neil Arrieta. Neil is now trading in his service to the Capitol for service to our country. Neil will be deploying in June to Afghanistan. I told him we sent a colleague of ours who's in the Navy. We need to send an Army person to take care of him and watch over him and keep him safe. But Neil, we appreciate all your service to the Capitol, and we appreciate your service to our country. And we wish you Godspeed to Specialist Neil Arietta as he goes to Afghanistan.
Thank you. So I'm ready to entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Allen moves, Mr. Hagman seconds that this House stands adjourned until Thursday, March 31st at 9 a.m. or upon call of the Speaker. Quorum call is lifted.